Hello and welcome back to the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast. I'm your host, Meg Carney, and I'm an outdoor and environmental writer and author of the book, Outdoor Minimalist, Waste Less Hiking, Camping, and Backpacking. Follow the link in the description to pre-order a copy of the book so you'll be the first to receive it on the date of September 1st, 2022. The Outdoor Minimalist Podcast has a goal to give listeners actionable ways to waste less hiking, camping, backpacking, and more during every step of their process. Your impact outdoors starts long before you hit the trail and goes beyond leave no trace ethics. You'll learn how to identify sustainable outdoor brands, how to ask hard questions regarding sustainability, and begin to shift and evolve your mindset to integrate minimalism into all of your outdoor pursuits. Are we loving the land to death? This question comes up time and time again with folks I talk to on and off of the podcast, and many professionals in the outdoor industry likely wonder the same thing. In episode 21 of the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast, we are going to explore this topic through the lens of conservation and political engagement. To help guide me through this discussion, I'm excited to introduce Tom Sadler. Tom Sadler is a Deputy Director of the Marine Fish Conservation Network. He is also the National Capital Correspondent for Mountain Journal. Sadler has an extensive history of promoting conservation through advocacy and communication. Sadler is an award-winning journalist with awards from the Outdoor Writers Association of America and the Virginia Outdoor Writers Association. He has served on the boards of numerous fly fishing, conservation, and journalism organizations. Sadler spent 14 years as a public affairs officer in the United States Navy Reserve. He received a Bachelor of Arts degree at the University of New Hampshire. A lifelong fly fisherman who, in his free time, guides and teaches for Mossy Creek Fly Fishing in Harrisonburg, Virginia. He and his wife, Beth, live with their family in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. Before we get to the interview, I just want to remind everyone that in 1 week, on Monday, February 7th, the Outdoor Minimalist Patreon will launch. So head over to theoutdoorminimalist.com to check that out, see what the patron exclusives are, and if you want to support the Outdoor Minimalist mission, become a patron. If you can't support monetarily or you're just not interested in my patron offerings, then you can still support the Outdoor Minimalist mission by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. So welcome to the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast, Tom. I'm excited to have you on the show. And from our other conversations, I already know you have a lot to offer and teach the audience, and me too. So before we jump into things, do you mind telling us a little bit more about how you fell in love with the outdoors and how it continues to be a part of your life?
For sure. Well, thanks, Megan. I really enjoy the opportunity to be on with you here. I'm very fortunate that I spent my first night outdoors when I was like 6.5 weeks old. My grandparents had a place up on Moosehead Lake in Maine, and I was born in the summer. And so we very quickly retreated up to Moosehead Lake and was in a bassinet and under a canvas when I was very young, and it stuck. And as my mother used to say, not necessarily always tongue-in-cheek, he was outdoors at an early age, and it's been hard to bring him in ever since. And so I've really enjoyed being involved in the outdoors, participating in the outdoors, hunting, fishing, camping, hiking, biking, kayaking, canoeing, you name it. It is the soul of my existence in many ways.
Yeah, and from what I understand, well, first of all, that's a great introduction to the outdoors. And from what I understand from talking to you previously is that a lot of your career and work is also related to outdoor recreation.
For sure. I was very fortunate to, have that background in the outdoors, and then the more time I spent in the outdoors, so the more I was educated, the more I learned, the more I cared, the more involved I got. And, first I was a volunteer and a financial supporter, but kind of morphed into a career. So that's how I wound up doing what I was doing. So I wanted to have a ship's clock in the background.
That makes sense. Yeah, so with that upbringing, and then as you entered into a career in the outdoor industry, how did that switch from being just an avid outdoorsman to an outdoor advocate begin?
It was a pretty seamless transition, I would say. Like I said, I was raised in the outdoors, had the opportunity to hunt and fish, camp with my parents and grandparents, and they inculcated me in the notion of being participatory in more than just taking advantage of the resource, but giving back to the resource. And before I had money, I was a volunteer, trail cleanups and stuff like that. And then when I had some disposable income that didn't go to the usual things that young men give money to, I started giving money to places like Ducks Unlimited and Trout Unlimited and et cetera. And then as I moved through my career, I worked in Washington on Capitol Hill and as a lobbyist. And then I really decided that as much as I loved the outdoors and as I began getting accomplished as a lobbyist, I thought I really would like to do this professionally for and on behalf of the outdoors. And so, as I said, it morphed into a career, which was not how I started in Washington, but certainly how I've wound up.
Yeah, that's a really interesting progression, I guess, and it makes a lot of sense. But from that standpoint, I think you have an interesting perspective on outdoor advocacy, I guess at a larger scale, or from almost an outside view looking in, but also you're integrated into it. So how do you think that outdoor advocacy or even conservation and restoration programs kind of fits into the outdoor industry right now?
I'd love to think that people who enjoy the great outdoors like I do and you do and your listeners, that they find themselves on a similar path or progression, if you will, from being a local volunteer to giving money and then maybe getting more involved. And I'm going to color this obviously with my experience as a conservation advocate, as a lobbyist, if you will, that those local efforts are essential. The financial support is essential. The hard thing to do, and I think I've found this over the years, is in coaching people to be lobbyists or citizen lobbyists, citizen advocates, is to petition your government, where that activity is protected by the Constitution. And so I encourage people to learn how they can do things directly by going to local meetings, going to local government meetings. Government has become more transparent. There's more opportunities. But doing public comments, writing your congressman, looking for opportunities to comment on activities that you consider important. And again, that can be as simple as establishing a trailhead or signage on a trail to coming to Washington to lobby on behalf of the Great American Outdoors Act or the Land and Water Conservation Fund or the Waters of the U.S. rulings and things like that.
Yeah, it is interesting to hear you talk about that because I think a lot of times as individuals, it doesn't really feel like we have a lot of sway, especially with those different type of government policies. But with outdoor recreation the way it is right now, especially since it's been growing so fast, it feels like in the last few years especially, it makes me wonder if the way that we're recreating and the way that we're approaching conservation somewhat passively is sustainable.
Well, I mean, that's a critical question, isn't it? I mean, is it sustainable means different things to different people. Mm-hmm. So in a lot of respects, it's a matter of perspective. But I kind of want to loop back to my last point about engagement is, I know it sounds scary and we put, or people will put a sort of a inflated value on our elected officials, and we shouldn't do that. It is very important in terms of being a citizen advocate to recognize that you pay their salaries, you're the reasons they're there. Their job is to make your life better. And so I encourage people to participate in their government. But in terms of sustainable recreation, that's as I said, that's a critical question, and how people look at it can be very different. And I've got a vantage point of 67 years, of which I can honestly say pretty much 66 of them were outdoors. And I've been informed over the years since I first read this in his book from Theodore Roosevelt in his book, A Book Lover's Holiday in the Open. And he wrote this, and this is on my wall, and it's a touchstone paragraph. And if you'll permit me, I'll quote it. And he wrote that defenders of the short-sighted men who in their greed and selfishness will, if permitted, rob our country of half its charm by their reckless extermination of all useful, beautiful things, sometimes seek to champion by saying the game belongs to the people. The greatest good for the greatest number applies to the number within the womb of time, compared to which now alive form but an insignificant fraction. Our duty to the whole, including those unborn generations, bids us restrain an unprincipled present-day minority from wasting the heritage of these unborn generations. The movement for conservation of wildlife and larger movement for the conservation of all natural resources are essentially democratic in spirit, purpose, and method. And that duty that Roosevelt asserts is what I was talking about. How we get there is going to be the challenge, right? And I think how we outdoor recreate is sustainable. It's how we do it is going to be the question.
Yeah, I have not read that book, but it sounds like that I probably should. But that quote does a nice job of summarizing what you were saying, and I am glad that you brought up the participation part again. So if outdoor recreation, the way that we're doing it is could potentially be sustainable in the practice, then how could, I guess, people become more involved through that mindset shift or lifestyle change of approaching those government agencies? Because I think to a lot of people, even writing an email or a letter can be really intimidating.
Yeah, and I really hope, if there's a takeaway from all of this, Meg, is that people aren't intimidated by doing that. You know, when I first started 40 years ago, handwritten letters, typed letters, IBM Selectric produced typed letters were the standard that came into to an office of an elected official. We've gone to email, we've gone to Twitter, we've gone to Facebook, whatever. It's become a lot easier, and the smart advocacy groups, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Trout Unlimited, what have you, they make it very easy to participate. And if you can just click a button and send an email, it's worth doing. If you can take another step and say, I'm willing to personalize that message, terrific. If you're willing to make a phone call, terrific. If you're willing to show up at a meeting or a rally, terrific. And I can tell you it makes a huge difference. Being in that participatory space, honestly, is tremendously important. And you were saying about lifestyle and mindsets from being outdoors and then to protecting them. I think what we're talking about really is a mindset that includes 4 elements. It includes responsibility, it includes sacrifice, it includes balance, and it includes perspective. And I think if your audience is thinking about, okay, so how do I do this? How do I translate what I care about? Think about it this way. Think about it from the perspective of the resource or the landscape or the waterscape. When we recreate, whatever that means, we have an impact. Now, of course, we think about that impact as individuals, right? How is that impacting me as an individual, whether it's fishing or hiking or whatever? We think about it as an individual. But I would argue that it's extremely important, if we are going to protect these outdoor spaces, if we're going to make our outdoor recreation sustainable, then we have to look at it from a different perspective. And that's the perspective of the land, the water, or the resource. And our impact on that is likely to be very different than the impact it has on ourselves, right? It is, in many respects, those impacts wound the resource or the landscape. And I use that word wound because it connotes that there can be a recovery, but it also that it leaves marks. Wounds can heal, but there's always a cost. And what I've come to learn, and what I would hope to impart to your audience, is that we should strive to recognize that there is a cost and balance in our outdoor recreation, and we need to find that balance. And part of finding that balance, and this is the hard thing, Meg, is we have to make a sacrifice. We have to understand that if we're going to enjoy those places in the future. Here's where I pull back to Roosevelt's comment about the womb of time, those future generations. As a grandfather, I think about the opportunities that my grandchildren have, and really that forms my core thinking about why I'm going to get involved in outdoor recreation advocacy. So what that means as we're looking at this going forward, we're looking at rules and regulations for the use of the outdoors. We have to recognize, and I know people aren't going to like to hear this, but we're going to have to sacrifice some of that on the altar of the common good. And I don't know how to put it more frankly, that's the price we pay for having a democracy, having the democracy that we live in. And it's our responsibility to recognize that and, where necessary, make those sacrifices. That's a really long-winded answer, and I apologize, but it's an interesting area for me, obviously.
Yeah, I think that it is a hard question to answer concisely. So I think everything.
I'm not always known for being concise, if you talk to my friends.
Yeah, no, there's a couple of things that really stuck out to me, though, when you're explaining all of that. And it was like, how do we find that balance? And then also that there is often a sacrifice involved. And one thing that I have noticed, and you probably have a deeper understanding of this, especially since you're more integrated into the sportsman realm of the outdoor industry, but it seems to me that in a lot of respects, even with the nonprofits that contribute to restoration, preservation, and conservation, a lot of that falls on sportsmen, hunting and fishing funds that go to conservation directly. And I guess this is a long way of me asking, how can we find a better balance in the outdoor industry as a whole?
You're very crafty there and diplomatic in asking a question that probably can cause a lot of consternation with people. You're right. I mean, obviously, the hunting and fishing community has a landmark banner to wave, which is that they fund a lot of protection, conservation, access, whatever, through federal law that they were instrumental in getting put in place, which puts an excise tax on the products that they use. You know, I'm on the board of the Department of Wildlife Resources here in Virginia, and a significant amount of funding comes from that excise tax. And there are benefits that go to many users in the same outdoor recreation space that aren't impacted by that excise tax. So to be even clearer, I mean, you don't pay an excise tax on a backpack. You do pay an excise tax on a fly rod. I don't want to get into whether that's fair or not fair, but it's noteworthy. The view that other users should participate is not alien concept. And I think that when I talk about responsibility, when I talk about sacrifice, I think the entire outdoor industry needs to think about that and think about how they're going to make their contribution in how they're going to do that, what ways they're going to do that. I can tell you, having labored in these vineyards for over 25 years, in the outdoor recreation industry space, it's complicated. And what was done to the hunting and fishing community, or done by the hunting and fishing community, happened in a very different era. And I wish I could say, gee, there's a simple answer to this. There isn't. It's complicated, but here's where, I'm going to put a fine point here, is that if we don't do it, we being collectively the outdoor recreation users groups, users in industry, we can't, if we don't fight for something, we can't cry about something when we lose it. So forewarned is forearmed. I would hope people recognize that there is a element of responsibility here that needs to be recognized, and those contributions need to be made. And I'm happy to dig deeper into that, but I'll stay at that level for the moment.
No, that sounds good. And it is a difficult question to ask and to answer without causing any type of adverse reaction, I guess.
Well, that's right. I mean, I have had arguments with the Outdoor Industry Association. I sat on the board of the American Fly Fishing Trade Association. I've seen it up close and personal on a policy level, on a economic level. It is the one thing I have learned in the years of being a lobbyist here, is that if you start drawing black and white, this or that, winners or losers, it becomes much more challenging. And so I think what is instructive here is that the hunting and fishing community advocated for this. They didn't have it done to them. They asked to have it done. And it was self-serving, right? I mean, that money went to protect game species. So it made sense. And we live in a world still today where people see the great outdoors and they think it's infinite, right? They think there's plenty of it, we'll never run out of it. And that's all true until you show up at the Great Smoky Mountain National Park or Yellowstone National Park or even Shenandoah. They're going to impose a reservation system on hikes here in the Shenandoah National Park. Is that bad? It depends on your point of view, right? I mean, I don't want to look at it bad or good. I want to look at it as what's responsible. And the responsible thing is do a little planning. I did search and rescue for a number of years. And, the reason I got called out was because somebody's plan didn't work, if they even had a plan. Somebody who decides to go hiking and never look at the weather and go hiking in a t-shirt and shorts in front of a cold front coming in that's going to change the temperature 20 degrees or 30 degrees isn't doing a lot of planning. If you want the spur of the moment to go hiking in a highly popular area, you may not get to do it. It's sort of the same as if you decide you want to go to the most popular restaurant or the most popular movie. And I mean this in the sort of the pre-COVID world, because who knows what it's like now. But my point is that if I wanted to go see the opening night of Star Wars, I had to buy a ticket. I had to think about it. Now, if I want to make a reservation at a restaurant, I have to make that reservation. So I hate to think that we've come to that, but I also like to believe that means that people care about the great outdoors. And so that ties me back to, if you're going to care, then you're going to have to make a bit of a sacrifice and you're going to have to take some responsibility.
Yeah, I did notice that, especially during COVID. It was partially because of COVID that there were a lot of places that didn't used to have permit processes, and then they introduced them, but they decided to keep them for the long term, which I guess in my perspective, like you said, it could differ for other people, is really positive. Like limiting the number of people into an area can be really helpful for preserving that space.
Well, and here's the other things that, as a fly fishing guide, I like to tell people where they can go where nobody else is going, right? I'm a weird subset of fly fishermen that like to fish only in small waters. But, so I likened it to somebody one time. I said, if you know, for example, that you're booked to do a trip, or this happened to us down in the Great Smoky Mountains. It rained for 2 days before we got there and rained the 2 or 3 days that we were there. Well, instead of fishing where we wanted to fish, where we had planned to fish, we looked at our map, we pulled the maps out and said, okay, so let's go look at the smaller places. So what it does, crowding has a tendency to force people to do one or two things. They can bitch and moan, or they can look at their map and say, oh, I'm going to go try someplace new. And it's that trying someplace new that opens up a whole new world, a whole new perspective, a whole new opportunity to do something. And I think that's the upside to all of this. But you have to take that mindset. You have to have that be adventurous, be willing to adapt mindset.
Yeah, and that isn't always easy for every person, but I definitely agree with what you're saying.
No, and I think about the premise of your podcast, minimalist, okay? In a lot of respects, that's a minimalist approach. Okay, I can't do what I want, so I'm going to go do something else. I'm not going to squawk and scream and yell. I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to adapt. Minimalism means using what, in a lot of respects, at least for me, it means adapting to what I've got as opposed to having 15 different versions of a flashlight, for example. As a fly fisherman, as a guide, I'm good at adapting, which means I don't have to carry 15 different fly rods.
Right, so you're working with what you have and starting from there.
That's right. And reality is, hey, this area is going to be crowded, so I can cry about it, or I can go find someplace new.
And oftentimes that dispersal and getting away from the crowds and things brings to a greater experience for the the person that is willing to seek those things out.
Absolutely. And that, I think, is, if we can hone in on a message, is take advantage of it as opposed to squawk about it. Take advantage of those opportunities. And tying it back a little bit more into the responsibility side of this is you can disperse and do it right? That's those places that haven't been hammered give you an opportunity to do it right and do it using all the appropriate aspects of outdoor recreation. And, people could talk for hours on what that means, but reducing your footprint, low impact, pack stuff back out, all those kind of things. But find the adventure. Find that adventure.
So I'm going to kind of relate back to a couple things that we touched on only briefly. I feel like we've been talking a lot about individual impacts and how you can participate as an individual recreationalist. But I'm also kind of wondering how outdoor industry companies and even government agencies that build policies and stuff like that, how is that currently, in your view, either helping or hurting public land?
Patagonia's Yvon Chouinard said, being a responsible company is a pain in the ass, but it's a worthwhile pain in the ass. And 30 years ago, he was probably a lone voice. I've been fortunate to know a lot of leaders in the outdoor industry, and it's been very rewarding to me to see over the last 10 years or so, more and more companies begin to adopt that responsibility mindset that Yvon was saying. And they've done it in a variety of manners where I would like to, this ties back to, and again, I'm going to take a moment to recognize that, my baggage is being a lobbyist. So I kind of look at it through the political sphere. So as opposed to telling somebody what the marketing approach or what the customer acquisition funnel should look like, I'm going to talk more about the politics here. And so, at the risk of being judgmental, I think more companies need to get political. As I said, they've done that to a bigger degree than they have in the past. But if the industry sits back and lets the foundations and non-governmental organizations, the NGOs and advocacy speak, carry that load, then the industry is shirking its responsibility to democracy and to the protection and conservation of those outdoor recreational venues. One of the things that, when I was on the board of the American Fly Fishing Trade Association, I chaired the Government Affairs Committee, and my good friend Chris Hunt made a statement. And he said, healthy habitat creates outdoor recreation opportunity. And I said, the corollary to that is healthy habitats create recreational opportunity that drive economic activity. And the industry needs to recognize that. And I think they understand it intellectually. I think they understand it from a business point of view, that, people in the outdoors are going to be their customers. But if there's no outdoors, if there are no healthy habitats, if there are no recreational venues, it's a very short view and it's a very quick road to loss of economic activity. So to me, how do you get that? I mean, we're very fortunate. We have a lot of public lands in this country. The people hold the power on public lands as opposed to the king in other countries. So when we have that opportunity, we have to be good stewards. And one of the ways to be good stewards is to use your political clout to make sure that those public lands are conserved, that they're protected, that those resources are protected. And the one thing I do know is the outdoor industry has tremendous political clout. How they use that, for good or for ill, remains to be seen. It is silence from the industry, a Neville Chamberlain-like appeasement to bad actors, has already cost us too much when it comes to public lands and natural resources, and that has to change. The outdoor industry needs to use that political clout to defend democracy, or there won't be any land and resources left for an industry to generate revenue from. And again, we have a unique series of circumstances for us. We have public lands and we have a democracy, right? Which means that industry can petition its government. Individuals can petition that government. We don't ever want to lose that voice. And if we don't use it, we run the risk of losing it. So I'm hopeful. I'm seeing things on the horizon that says the industry is doing more in that respect. I think we need to recognize I think the industry needs to recognize how important that is. I think people need to recognize how important that is, but the industry does. The government responds to the people by and large. Now, we could have arguments with other people about who, quote, the people are, and that's a whole nother ballgame. But the fact of the matter is today we still have the means, the right to petition our government, and we need to do that. And we can't let a minority voice dictate what our future is. And again, that's why I quoted that Roosevelt statement. I come back to it when he was right, is that larger movement for the conservation of all natural resources are essentially democratic in spirit, in purpose, and in method. And it's that method that I think is what needs to be exercised and exercised hard and more. And it is, protecting those lands, protecting the ability to make those petitions. It's pretty simple, Meg. I mean, most everybody understands what needs to be done, right? We need, we can't turn around and make more land. Right? We don't grow it. Right? Now, we can do that with resources, and we need to pay attention to that. I mean, in my world, I deal with the management of fish in the ocean every day. And how we manage them means whether there's going to be sustainable fishing for the future. In the consumptive side of the outdoor industry, we know what that looks like. And we've had a lot of experience, 50, 60 years of good experience on what that looks like. On the protecting our resources, our landscapes and our waterscapes, right? We haven't been as good because we have that sort of, it's an infinite amount of that stuff. It's, we can't really hurt it. And that's not true. We've had the benefit of 50 years, 60 years, almost 100 years of looking at mistakes, harsh, but I'll use the word. Mistakes made that we need to respond to, we need to correct. It's those wounds I was talking about. That's hard-won knowledge. If we don't use it, if the industry doesn't use it, to say, hey, you government need to have policies in place that don't adversely impact these outdoor recreational venues because they are too darn important to this country. And we can't cry about it when we lose it.
Yeah, I think that, I know that there is a tipping point and it could go either way, right? So it could go the way that we hope it will go and that there are more protections and more conservation, but it could also go the other way. And I think it goes back to a lot of what you've been saying through this conversation is that everyone has a responsibility, but your level of, to use your words, political clout will vary.
That's right.
Yeah. So the companies will have a little bit more of an influence, but sometimes they maybe wouldn't be willing to take those steps until the individuals begin to petition those companies or organizations, and then they're able to move forward, kind of like progress together.
That's right. And I think there's 2 points here. One is that, like individuals, sometimes companies are reticent to use that clout to get involved in politics. Either they don't like it, they don't think it's going to be helpful to them. I worked in industry, and the government affairs office was not well liked by most of the people in the business because they thought we were wizards doing alchemy in the back room to fool around with politics. So I get it. I understand. But it doesn't, you're taking yourself out of a game that everybody else is playing. It's if you aren't in there talking to your senator, to your congressman, the committees, the agencies, somebody else is. I can promise you that. I know that firsthand. Somebody else is going to do it. And your voice then is not heard or heard as well. And so there are extremely qualified people who can help get those messages done in a way that results in your customers demanding, and we've seen this, and we see shareholder initiatives, we see boycotts of companies. I think there's more of that coming, and if the industry doesn't arm itself, they're going to find themselves in a very uncomfortable place. So I, like your individual listeners, the industry listeners should pay attention to their political opportunities, use their political clout to, let's just be really honest about it, protect their economic interest here. Because I can tell you, I was in the environmental services industry. I have a lot of friends in the extraction industry. Those guys are in the game. If the industry, and it doesn't have to, don't rely just on the trade associations. Get in there yourself. And I look at how hard Patagonia has been doing this for the last few years, and how, really hard they've been doing it in the last couple of years. That's a good model. I don't think they're going to feel competitively disadvantaged if other people pick up that laboring oar. You can't rely on just one company or one trade association to carry the message here. And I hope we don't squander that hard-won knowledge of the last 50 years and find ourselves at a place where either our democracy has been weakened to the point where it's not working, or the interests of those people who care about the outdoors have lost the ability to impact the decisions being made that impact those venues. I know the word existential threat gets tossed around a lot, but it's pretty existential for those of us who see it day to day. And again, it's at 67 years old, I still have faith that responsibility and good judgment will win out. But I would be lying to you if I said that hadn't been shaken a little bit. So.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that collective action, it does take individuals. So the individual action leads to collective action. So I think that it is possible to continue moving in a positive direction as an industry. But yeah, we can't rely just on one good model. Other people need to join forces to push this forward and those policies to change. I think that we have hit a lot of really great talking points, but just as a way to kind of wind down the conversation, is there any one specific takeaway that you would give to the listeners about the concepts that we've talked about?
So, yes, I would say get engaged, get fired up, participate in advocacy, but don't do it at the expense of enjoying what you really love. Right? So, be that reluctant warrior, that part-time warrior, be mindful, take that balance. It's worth fighting for. It's really, 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 really worth fighting for. But go enjoy it, because that's what's going to make you want to fight for it even more. So, go get outdoors more often than writing your congressman or going to Washington, but don't forget to get out there and raise a little hell. As I think it was John Lewis who said, get in good trouble. Good trouble is coming back from a wonderful hike and saying, okay, as I put in a journal the views of the things I've saw and how important it was to me, I'm going to take 5 minutes and send a note to my congressman to say, hey, you really need to be protecting these wild spaces. Something like that.
No, that's an awesome message. I love that, because it is all about balance once again. But if people want to learn more about your work and some of the other projects you are working on, because you kind of have your hand in a lot of different places, wear a lot of hats. So how can people find you and contact you?
You can find me on Twitter at Tom Sadler. I'm on Facebook, Tom Sadler. I have a website, themiddlerivergroup.com. I work for the Marine Fish Conservation Network, which is conservefish.org, and I write for Mountain Journal. So you can find me in a variety of places. I'm always happy to engage people in learning how to be a good advocate, and I like to think I can teach them how to fly fish on occasion.
Awesome. Well, I will put links to all of your socials and contacts, as well as some of the things that you discussed, like the book that you referenced. And other than that, thank you for coming on and sharing all of your insights.
Well, Meg, it's been a true pleasure. Thank you for inviting me and giving me an opportunity.
I just want to say thank you again to Tom for taking the time to share his insights and experiences. I hope that you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. Thanks for listening, and if you like what you hear, let me know. Leave a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Starting on Monday, February 7th, new content will appear on the Outdoor Minimalist Patreon. Head over to the outdoorminimalist.com for more information about our listener support and patron exclusives. You can still find me on Instagram at outdoor.minimalist.book. Follow there for daily updates, other educational resources, and to help build an outdoor community with the shared goal to create a better outdoor space as we recreate.